The first thing to return was the pain. It wasn't the sharp, clean pain of a needle or a broken bone. This was a symphony of agony, a deep, thrumming bass note of battered muscle and bone, overlaid with the hot, staccato stings of 100 angry wasps. It bloomed behind her eyes, radiated down her spine, and settled like a blanket of fire across her back and legs. The second thing was the sound, a single, metronomic beep, clinical and indifferent. Beep, beep, beep. She knew that sound. It was the soundtrack to her life, the rhythm of the pediatric ward where she worked. But it sounded different from this side of the sheets, muffled and distant, as if coming from underwater. Her name was Maya Castillo, and she was a nurse. Her brain, sluggish and thick with medication, tried to perform its trained function. Assess, vitals. The beep was steady, maybe a little fast. Tachycardia, expected, given the pain. Respiration? Each breath was a shallow, ragged thing that sent fresh waves of fire across her ribs. Consciousness? She was swimming up through a thick, dark syrup, fighting for the surface. She pried her eyelids open. They felt like lead shutters. The world was a blurry watercolor of white and pale blue. A ceiling. A hanging IV bag. Its clear fluid. A slow, steady drip. The smell hit her next, that uniquely sterile cocktail of antiseptic, bleach, and something vaguely metallic. The scent of a hospital. Her hospital. A memory, bright and violent, flashed behind her eyes. Not a movie, but a single, terrifying snapshot. Green grass, impossibly vibrant, the sound of children laughing. A small, dark object, tumbling end over end through the brilliant blue sky. Her own voice screaming, "Get down!" The beep of the heart monitor sped up. Beep, 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 beep. Another flash. The rough bark of an oak tree against her cheek. The weight of small, trembling bodies pressed behind her. The frantic, terrified cry of a little boy. A bright blue jacket. Then, a universe of white light and a sound so immense it wasn't a sound at all, but a physical blow that lifted her off the ground and slammed her back down. Silence. She tried to sit up, a guttural groan escaping her lips. The pain was blinding, a white-hot nova that erased all thought. "Easy, mija, easy." A warm, familiar hand gently pushed her back down onto the pillow. Through the blur, a face swam into view. Her mother, Maria, her eyes red-rimmed and puffy, her expression a ragged tapestry of fear and relief. "Mom?" Maya's voice was a dry, cracked whisper. "I'm here, baby. I'm here." Maria's tears started anew, plopping onto the starchy white sheet. "The doctors, they said you were so brave." The word felt alien. Brave? She didn't feel brave. She felt like a shipwreck, a collection of broken parts held together by gauze and stubbornness. The memories were still coming in disjointed pieces, refusing to form a coherent narrative. The community picnic, volunteering at the first aid tent, the sun on her face. A rare Saturday off, a small slice of normalcy in a life defined by 12-hour shifts and the relentless pressure of student loan payments. The Riverbend Community Picnic, fair, had been a perfect slice of Americana. The air, thick with the scent of grilled hot dogs and spun sugar, buzzed with the happy chaos of a town at play. Maya, in jeans and a simple t-shirt, had felt a quiet contentment as she bandaged a scraped knee on a tearful 5-year-old at the first aid tent. It was what she did. It was who she was. She patched up little hurts, offered a kind word, and sent them back into the world, a little better than before. She remembered watching a group of kids playing near a magnificent, sprawling oak tree. They were chasing a soccer ball, their shrieks of laughter like wind chimes in the warm afternoon air. One boy, smaller than the rest, was particularly intense, his brow furrowed in concentration as he dribbled the ball, his bright blue jacket a flash of color against the green. Maya had smiled. There was something so pure about the unself-conscious joy of a child. The shift in the atmosphere was subtle at first, then terrifyingly abrupt. A man, gaunt and wild-eyed, began shouting near the main stage. His words were a garbled manifesto of rage and paranoia. Security personnel, 2 of them, started moving towards him, their hands raised in a placating gesture. The man's eyes darted around, landing on the playground area. On the children, panic seized him. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a dark, metallic object. From her vantage point, Maya's mind, honed by years of emergency room triage, processed the image faster than thought. It wasn't a rock. It wasn't a can. It was a pineapple-shaped M67 fragmentation grenade. The world seemed to slow, the sounds of the fair fading into a dull roar. Her training screamed a single, overriding directive: protect the vulnerable. She didn't make a decision. Her body simply responded. She was already moving, sprinting from the relative safety of the tent, her legs pumping, her entire being focused on a single point in space and time. The grenade arced through the air, a lazy, lethal toss, heading directly for the cluster of children by the oak tree. "Get down! Get behind me!" The scream was torn from her lungs, raw and desperate. The kids froze, their faces turning towards her in wide-eyed confusion. The grenade clattered onto the grass about 15 feet from them. The 4-second fuse had begun. She reached them in a blur of motion. She didn't have time to be gentle. She shoved, pushed, and herded the terrified children behind the thick, solid trunk of the ancient oak. The boy in the blue jacket, Leo, stumbled. Maya grabbed him, pulling him back with her, using her own body as the final barrier. She curled herself over him and another small girl, tucking them into the space between her body and the tree. She turned her back to the blast, squeezed her eyes shut, and braced for the inevitable. The world erupted. It wasn't the fireball of a movie. It was a physical concussion, a pressure wave that felt like being hit by a truck. The air was sucked from her lungs. A deafening crack boom tore through the world, followed instantly by the sensation of 1,000 burning needles being driven into her back, her arms, her legs. The force threw her forward, her head cracking against the oak tree. Her vision flared white, then swam in a sea of black spots. The immediate aftermath was an eerie silence, the result of a perforated eardrum. Then, sound rushed back in a distorted wave. The high-pitched screaming of children, the panicked shouts of adults, the acrid smell of burnt propellant and scorched earth. Her first conscious thought, through the blinding haze of pain, was for the children. She twisted her neck, a movement that sent lightning bolts of agony through her. They were crying, terrified, but they were upright. They were whole. Leo, the boy in the blue jacket, was staring at her, his mouth open in a silent scream, his face streaked with dirt. Alive. A wave of profound relief washed over her, and then the darkness finally took her completely. "Miss Castillo? Maya?" A new voice cut through the fog in her hospital room. "Doctor?" Lena Hansen, chief of pediatrics and Maya's former mentor, stood at the foot of her bed, her expression a mixture of clinical concern and undisguised awe. "Dr. Hansen?" "Welcome back," Lena said, her smile gentle. "You gave us quite a scare." She ran through the litany of injuries with a calm professionalism that Maya found oddly soothing. Multiple shrapnel wounds across her back, buttocks, and the backs of her legs, 17 of them, required surgical removal. A grade 2 concussion, a perforated left eardrum, which would hopefully heal. Severe deep tissue bruising. "You're lucky," Dr. Hansen concluded, her voice softening. "Incredibly lucky. And so are those kids." The bomb squad said, "The way you positioned yourself and used that tree trunk as a baffle, it absorbed most of the blast and almost all of the fragmentation. You saved their lives, Maya. There's no question about it." For a few hours, the world seemed to agree. Her mother showed her the news on her phone. Headlines blared: "Angel of Riverbend Park. Hero nurse shields children from grenade attack." Flowers began to arrive, crowding every available surface of the room until it smelled like a funeral home. Messages of support poured in from strangers across the country. In the cocoon of her hospital bed, insulated by painkillers and the love of her mother, Maya felt a fragile sense of peace. She had done the right thing. The cost was high, but the children were safe. That was all that mattered. The first crack in that peace came in the form of a man in a rumpled suit who radiated an aura of stale coffee and cynicism. "Detective Frank Harding," he introduced himself, flashing a badge with a weary air. He sat in the chair by her bed, pulling out a small notepad. "Just need to get your official statement, Ms. Castillo." His tone was flat, devoid of the admiration or gratitude she had started to get used to. It was the tone of a man processing a piece of paperwork. "I'll tell you what I can," Maya whispered, her throat still raw. He started with the basics, but his questions quickly took on a peculiar prosecutorial edge. "You were the on-duty nurse at the first aid tent, is that correct?" "I was volunteering, yes." "So you were assigned to that specific station. It wasn't a question." "Why did you leave your post, Ms. Castillo?" The question threw her. I saw the man. I saw what he threw. It was a grenade. And you're an expert in identifying explosive ordnance? Harding asked, his pen scratching against the paper. I'm a nurse. I know a weapon when I see one. The kids... Right, the kids, Harding interrupted, his eyes flicking up from his notepad for the first time. They were tired, gray eyes, full of a deep, abiding skepticism. So, you made the unilateral decision to abandon your station and intervene directly. They were going to die, Maya said, a note of disbelief creeping into her voice. What was I supposed to do? Your job was to render aid at the tent, he stated, as if explaining a simple rule to a difficult child. The police and event security were already moving to intercept the subject. By running into an active and unstable situation, you could have complicated their response. You could have become another victim they needed to worry about. Maya stared at him, stunned. He was dissecting her instinctive, life-saving act as if it were a breach of protocol, a procedural error. There was no acknowledgement of the outcome, no hint of thanks. There was only the cold, dispassionate logic of a man who saw the world not in terms of right and wrong, but in columns of liability and compliance. He asked a few more questions, his tone never wavering from its flat, accusatory baseline, then snapped his notebook shut. All right, we'll be in touch if we need to clarify anything. He left without another word. Maya lay back against the pillows, a cold dread seeping into her bones, chilling her more than the pain. The flowers suddenly seemed to mock her, their bright colors garish and loud in the sterile room. She had saved 5 children, and the first official response from the world outside was not a thank you, but an interrogation. It was the first tremor of the earthquake that was about to shatter her life. 2 days later, the second tremor arrived. He didn't wear a rumpled suit. He wore an immaculate one, a tailored charcoal gray armor that probably cost more than her monthly rent. His name was Mr. Gerald Henderson, and his title was Vice President of Risk Management for the hospital. He carried a leather portfolio instead of a notepad, and his smile was a work of polished, insincere art. Ms. Castillo Maya, he began, his voice a smooth, placid baritone. On behalf of the entire executive board, I want to extend our deepest admiration for your bravery. You've become quite the local celebrity. Maya, propped up on her pillows, offered a weak smile. I just did what anyone would have. Ah, but that's where you're mistaken, Henderson said, taking the seat Harding had occupied. Not just anyone would do that, and that, you see, presents us with a certain administrative complexity. He opened his portfolio, and the smile never left his face, but it didn't reach his eyes. His eyes were cold, like polished river stones. We've been reviewing your file in preparation for processing your workers' compensation claim. Okay, Maya said slowly. The thing is, Henderson continued, tapping a perfectly manicured finger on a document, your actions, while publicly lauded, were technically performed outside the designated purview of your volunteer contract. He spoke the words as if they were self-evident truths. Your role was to remain at the first aid station to render assistance. By leaving that station and engaging with an active threat, you were, in the strictest legal sense, acting as a private citizen, not as an employee or designated volunteer of this hospital. The air in the room seemed to grow thin. Maya stared at him, trying to parse the corporate jargon. What? What are you saying? I'm saying that filing this under workers' compensation could be problematic, he said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. It could set a dangerous precedent. Imagine if all our nurses decided to act as first responders in active shooter situations. The liability would be astronomical. Our insurance underwriters are quite firm on this point. Her mother, who had been sitting quietly in the corner, stood up. Are you serious? My daughter has holes in her back. She saved 5 children, and you're talking about insurance? Henderson finally turned his gaze to Maria, his expression one of pained patience. Ma'am, I understand your emotion, but a hospital is a business as well as a public trust. We must operate within the clear boundaries of policy and fiscal responsibility. What your daughter did was heroic, but it was not her job. He turned back to Maya. The hospital's official position is one of immense pride. Unofficially, and for your own planning purposes, you should be prepared for the possibility that your claim will be denied. I would start looking at your private health insurance policy's coverage for catastrophic trauma. I've taken the liberty of highlighting the relevant sections on liability and high-risk personal activity. He slid a pamphlet out of his portfolio and placed it on her bedside table, next to a vase of wilting roses. It was a cold, calculated act of cruelty disguised as help. He had come not to praise her, but to sever the hospital's financial ties to her heroism. He saw her not as a hero, but as a multi-million-dollar lawsuit waiting to happen, a red number on a spreadsheet. "We are, of course, waiving the costs for your immediate stabilization and stay," he added magnanimously. "Consider it a gesture of our esteem." After he left, a chilling silence filled the room. The rhythmic beep of the monitor seemed to mock her. Maria was shaking with a rage so profound she couldn't speak. Maya simply stared at the pamphlet. The hero narrative that had sustained her for 2 days crumbled into dust, replaced by a terrifying new reality. She wasn't the angel of Riverbend Park. She was a liability. She was a problem to be managed. And she was on her own. The next few days were a blur of pain management, physical therapy, and a parade of visitors. Most were the parents of the children she had saved. They came bearing gifts, their faces etched with a gratitude so profound it was humbling. They showed her pictures of their kids, now safe at home, and told her stories that made her ache with a strange mix of pride and sorrow. These visits were the only thing keeping her afloat in a rising tide of anxiety. Then Brenda Walsh came. Maya remembered her son, Timmy, a boy who had been on the periphery of the group. He'd gotten away with only a small scratch on his arm from a piece of flying tree bark. Brenda, a woman with sharp features and an even sharper air of entitlement, did not look grateful. She looked aggrieved. She stood at the foot of the bed, her arms crossed, her purse clutched like a weapon. "I suppose I should thank you," she began, the words sounding like an accusation. "It's okay," Maya said, shifting uncomfortably. "I'm just glad Timmy is all right." "He's not all right," Brenda snapped. "He's traumatized. He has nightmares. Do you know why? Because a strange woman came screaming at him like a lunatic. My therapist says the initial trauma wasn't the explosion, it was you." Maya blinked, speechless. The room suddenly felt very cold. "And you were so rough," Brenda continued, her voice rising. "You grabbed him. He has a bruise on his arm." "A bruise, Ms. Castillo? You're a pediatric nurse. You should know how to handle a child without causing injury. It was reckless. Frankly, I'm shocked at your lack of professionalism." "There was a grenade," Maya whispered, her voice trembling. "I had less than 4 seconds." Details. Brenda waved a dismissive hand. "The point is, my son is suffering from emotional distress directly because of your actions. And my lawyer agrees with me. You'll be hearing from him." She turned on her heel and swept out of the room, leaving a stunned silence in her wake. Maya felt a profound, soul-crushing despair. To be betrayed by the system was one thing. To be attacked by the very people she had sacrificed herself for was a cruelty she couldn't comprehend. It was a poison that seeped into her wounds, making them ache with a pain deeper than any shrapnel could cause. That night, the story broke. A local news channel, notorious for its "if it bleeds, it leads" sensationalism, ran an exclusive investigation. The anchor, a man with predatory eyes and a voice dripping with manufactured concern, posed the question, hero nurse or reckless menace? The segment was a masterclass in character assassination. They had anonymous sources from within the hospital, clearly Henderson, who spoke of protocol violations and abandoning her post. They featured a lengthy, tearful interview with Brenda Walsh, who recounted Maya's aggression and recklessness. They barely mentioned the grenade. The narrative had been twisted. Her heroism was now recklessness. Her sacrifice was now a liability. Her quick thinking was now a dangerous breach of the rules. The story went viral. The faceless, ravenous mob of social media descended. The hashtag started trending, hospital vigilante, clout chaser nurse. Memes appeared, depicting her with a crazy smile, running from her first aid tent. Trolls flooded her social media pages, which she had forgotten to make private. She probably faked the whole thing for a GoFundMe. Attention seeker? Bet she's loving this. My cousin is a cop, and he says she's under investigation for obstructing police. That Brenda Walsh lady is right. She probably terrified those kids more than the boom. Lying in her bed, scrolling through the endless cascade of hatred on her phone, Maya felt like she was drowning. The physical pain was a dull, distant hum compared to the sharp, cutting agony of this public flagellation. The world that had called her a hero was now calling for her head. The final nail was hammered in by Detective Harding. He met her not in her room, but in a small, windowless consultation office a week later, on the day she was being discharged. His demeanor had shifted from skeptical to openly hostile. He slapped a tablet down on the metal table between them. On the screen was the news report. "Your story, Miss Castillo," he began, his voice laced with contempt, "is falling apart. We have witnesses claiming you were aggressive. The hospital confirms you broke protocol. You're not a hero anymore. You're a person of interest." "A person of interest? In what?" Maya cried, her voice cracking. "I don't know. Public endangerment? Reckless conduct? Obstruction? You know, I pulled your financials," he said, leaning forward. "A lot of student loan debt for a pediatric nurse. A person could get desperate for a big payday. A book deal, maybe? A movie? All you need is a good story. People do crazy things for their 15 minutes of fame." The accusation was so vile, so far from the truth, that it shocked her out of her despair and into a burning rage. "A motive?" she shot back, her voice shaking with fury. "My motive was that children were about to be blown up. Where were you, detective? Were you running towards the danger? Or are you just good at sitting in a comfortable room days later, telling the person with 17 pieces of shrapnel in her back that she did it all wrong?" Her outburst only seemed to confirm his suspicions. He smiled a thin, cruel smile. "You've got a temper. We'll add that to the file." He stood up. "The DA's office will be reviewing your case. I'd advise you not to leave town." Discharged from the hospital, Maya entered a new kind of prison. Her small apartment felt like a bunker. She kept the curtains drawn, terrified of the reporters that occasionally camped outside. The weeks that followed were a slow, grinding descent into hell. First came the official letter from the insurance carrier. In cold, stark typeface, it declared her claim denied, citing gross negligence and violation of company policy. Attached was the first of many staggering medical bills. Next came the call from a slick, smug lawyer representing Brenda Walsh, officially informing her a lawsuit had been filed for physical and emotional damages. With her savings evaporating to cover co-pays and prescriptions, and with no income from the job she could no longer perform, she missed a rent payment. The eviction notice, taped to her door in a stark red envelope, felt like the final blow. One bleak Tuesday afternoon, it all came crashing down. She was sitting on her floor, surrounded by a sea of paper unpaid bills, legal threats, collections notices. The national news was on the TV, the sound muted. Her own face stared back at her from the screen, under a chyron that read, "The controversy behind the Riverbend Angel." The weight of it, all the physical pain, the financial ruin, the public humiliation, the utter, soul-crushing injustice finally broke her. The quiet strength that had defined her entire life crumbled. A sob tore through her, then another, and another, until she was weeping uncontrollably, her body shaking with the force of her despair. Her mother rushed in and knelt beside her, wrapping her in her arms. Maria said nothing, just held her daughter as she fell apart. "They were right, Mom," Maya choked out between sobs, her voice thick with defeat. "Henderson, Harding, they were all right. I should have just stayed in the tent. I should have let it happen. I should have done my job." She had faced down a grenade without flinching. But the slow, systematic cruelty of the world that followed had accomplished what the explosion could not. It had shattered her spirit. The next morning, the world outside was gray and silent, matching the landscape of her soul. She sat numbly on her lumpy sofa, staring at the eviction notice on the coffee table as if it were a death certificate. Her mother was in the kitchen, making coffee, the clinking sounds unnaturally loud in the quiet apartment. Then, a sound cut through the stillness. A sharp, authoritative ring of the doorbell. Ding-dong. Maya flinched. Her heart hammered against her ribs. It was him, the process server with Brenda's lawsuit, or a reporter who had snuck past the doorman, or the landlord, come to personally oversee her humiliation. She squeezed her eyes shut, wishing she could simply disappear. "Don't answer it," she whispered. Her mother came out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Her face was etched with a new, fierce resolve. "No, we're done hiding." She walked to the door and peered through the peephole. She was silent for a long moment. When she turned back to Maya, her expression was one of profound confusion. "Maya, you should see this." Hesitantly, Maya got up, her body aching with every step. She looked through the small glass lens. She wasn't looking at a single person. She was looking at three. They were large men, impossibly so, seeming to take up the entire hallway. They were dressed in unassuming civilian clothes jeans, plain Henley shirts, light jackets, but it was their posture that made the air catch in her throat. They stood with a stillness that was anything but relaxed. It was the absolute calm of contained power, their shoulders square, their chins up, their gazes fixed forward. They looked nothing like cops, reporters, or landlords. They looked like statues carved from granite and resolve. Her mother, sensing her hesitation, undid the chain and opened the door. The man in the center stepped forward slightly. He was in his early 40s, with short-cropped hair, a square jaw, and eyes the color of a stormy sea. Those eyes were locked on Maya, and in them she saw none of the pity, suspicion, or contempt she had grown so used to. She saw only a calm, focused intensity. His voice was a deep, steady baritone, a voice that carried an unspoken weight of command. "Ma'am, are you Maya Castillo?" Maya swallowed, her throat suddenly dry. "Who's asking?" The man's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "My name is Alex Thorne. You saved my son's life." He gestured to the two silent men flanking him. "We know this is unexpected. We just wanted to talk." "May we come in?" Maya stared at him, then at the two other men, and a piece of the puzzle clicked into place. The quiet intensity, the aura of absolute competence, the way they moved as a single, coordinated unit. It was the boy from the park, the one she had pulled behind the tree at the last second, the one with the bright blue jacket, Leo. This was his father. Her mother, seeing the look on her face, stepped back and opened the door wider. The three men entered her tiny living room, and the space seemed to shrink around them. They moved with a quiet, deliberate economy, their presence overwhelming the cramped apartment. One of them, without a word, positioned himself near the door, a silent, watchful guardian. Commander Alex Thorne didn't sit. He stood in the center of the room, his hands clasped loosely behind his back. "I apologize for the intrusion," he began, his gaze sweeping over the room, taking in the stacks of bills on the coffee table, the drawn curtains, the palpable air of despair. He saw it all, and a flicker of something hard and angry passed through his eyes before being suppressed. "I was on deployment," he explained, his voice low and steady. "Out of communication. I only got back stateside 2 days ago. The first reports I saw called you a hero. The later ones," he paused, his jaw tightening. "The other parents, the grateful ones, they reached out to my wife. They told us what was happening." Maya just stared, unable to form words. Her mother stood by her side, a hand on her shoulder, a silent pillar of support. Thorne took a step closer. His eyes, which had seemed so stormy and intimidating in the hallway, were now filled with a raw, profound sincerity. "Ms. Castillo, Maya. I work in a world of violence and chaos. My men and I are trained to run towards danger. It's our job. We get paid for it. We have the best equipment and the best training on the planet." He shook his head slowly, a look of genuine awe on his face. "What you did, you, a civilian, a nurse, you saw a threat that would make trained soldiers hesitate, and you didn't run away. You ran towards it. You ran to shield children you didn't know. You used your own body as a shield for my son." His voice cracked slightly on the last two words. "In my world, we have a name for that. It's not recklessness. It's not a protocol violation. It's honor. It's courage of a kind that can't be taught." The words, so different from everything she had heard for weeks, were like water on parched earth. A single tear traced a path down Maya's cheek. "They're destroying me," she whispered, the confession finally breaking free. "The hospital, the police, the media. I'm losing everything." "I know," Thorne said, his voice now cold and hard as steel. He nodded towards the pile of papers on her table. "I know about the insurance denial, the lawsuit from that woman, the eviction notice. I know Detective Harding has treated you like a criminal and Mr. Henderson has treated you like a balance sheet." He looked her directly in the eye, and she felt the full force of his conviction. "We have a code in my community. We do not leave our people behind. Ever. You shielded my son, Maya. You are one of our people now." He pulled out his phone. "This siege ends. Right now." What followed was not a shouting match or a dramatic confrontation. It was a swift, methodical, and devastatingly effective counteroffensive, executed with the precision of a special operation. Thorne made one call. Within 30 minutes, Maya's phone rang. The caller identified himself as Benjamin Carter, a lawyer from a D.C. firm that worked with a foundation supporting military families and, as he put it, bona fide civilian heroes. His voice was calm, confident, and radiated competence. "Ms. Castillo," he said, "Commander Thorne has briefed me. I am now your legal counsel. Do not speak to the hospital, the police, or any media. Do not answer your door. Refer everyone to me. Are we clear?" Maya, stunned, could only manage a quiet, "Yes." "Good," Carter said. "Now get some rest. We're going on the attack." An hour later, in his glass-walled office, Gerald Henderson received a call. He answered with his usual smug politeness. "Henderson." The voice on the other end was not deferential. We can imagine Henderson's posture changing as the call progressed, his spine straightening, the color draining from his face, a sheen of sweat appearing on his brow. The caller, Ben Carter, informed him that he was now representing Ms. Castillo on behalf of the Naval Special Warfare Command's primary charitable foundation. He was told that the foundation was prepared to cover 100% of Maya's past, present, and future medical expenses. He was also informed that a team of independent investigators was being hired to look into the hospital's defamatory campaign and bad faith denial of benefits against a citizen who saved the life of a child of a Tier 1 asset. He was instructed in no uncertain terms to preserve all emails, call logs, and internal memos. When Henderson hung up the phone, his hands were shaking. Meanwhile, Commander Alex Thorne, a man who had spent his career avoiding the press, sat down for a single, exclusive interview with a highly respected national journalist known for her integrity. He was in his full dress uniform, his chest adorned with ribbons that spoke of conflicts and courage in faraway lands. He didn't raise his voice. He simply and calmly laid out the facts. He described the physics of the blast, the type of grenade, the shrapnel pattern. He detailed Maya's actions not as a civilian might, but with the cool precision of a tactical expert. She assessed the threat, identified the most vulnerable targets, and moved to create cover and concealment, using her own body as the final layer of shielding. It was a perfect, instinctive act of battlefield heroism. Then, his eyes hardening, he looked directly into the camera. "My 8-year-old son is alive today because of Maya Castillo, and for her courage, she has been harassed by law enforcement, abandoned by her hospital, and slandered in the media. This is not just an injustice, it is a disgrace to everything we claim to value. My community, the SEAL community, recognizes her for what she is, a hero. As of today, our foundation has awarded her the Citizens Medal of Valor, which includes a financial grant to ensure she never has to worry about a bill or a rent payment again." He leaned forward slightly. "We take care of our own." The interview was a nuclear bomb dropped into the public narrative. The fallout was immediate and absolute. The hospital's board of directors, faced with a PR cataclysm involving a beloved nurse, a revered war hero, and a powerful foundation, convened an emergency meeting. Gerald Henderson was fired before the end of the day. The hospital issued a gushing public apology, retroactively approved her workers' comp with full back pay, and publicly offered her a lifetime of free medical care. The police chief and the mayor, their offices flooded with furious calls from veterans, military families, and outraged citizens, acted swiftly. Detective Harding was publicly reprimanded and suspended pending an internal affairs investigation. He was forced to issue a formal, humiliating apology to Maya. Brenda Walsh became an overnight pariah, the subject of 1,000 vicious articles about entitlement. Her lawyer, seeing the writing on the wall, dropped her as a client, and the lawsuit vanished. The media outlets that had smeared Maya tripped over themselves to correct the record, now hailing her as a modern-day Joan of Arc who had battled a cruel, heartless system and won. 6 months later, the sun was shining again on Riverbend Park. A new, state-of-the-art playground stood where the scarred patch of earth had been. A small crowd had gathered for the dedication ceremony. Maya stood at the podium. She walked with a slight, almost imperceptible limp, a permanent reminder of that day. The scars on her arms, once a source of shame, were now just a part of her. But she stood tall, her eyes clear and confident. She was not the same woman. The fire had not consumed her, it had forged her. The playground was being named the Maya Castillo Place of Courage. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but steady, carrying across the hushed crowd. She didn't talk about Henderson or Harding. She spoke about community, about the instinct to protect one another, about the idea that courage isn't the absence of fear, but acting in spite of it. After the speeches, a small boy in a bright blue jacket ran to her and threw his arms around her legs. It was Leo Thorne. "Thank you, Maya," he said, looking up at her with wide, serious eyes. Maya knelt down and hugged him back, a genuine, unburdened smile finally reaching her eyes. "You're welcome, Leo." Commander Thorne walked over, a soft smile on his own face. "The Foundation has a new initiative," he said to her quietly, as they watched the children swarm the new equipment. "We're setting up a rapid response fund. Legal and financial support for people like you good Samaritans, everyday heroes who get punished for doing the right thing. We need someone to help run it. Someone who understands." He didn't need to ask the question. He could see the answer in her eyes. The pain had given her a purpose. The scars had given her a mission. Her battle was over, but a new, better war was just beginning.